In the last video, I left you with this picture, and I said 10% alcohol is not new. 10% alcohol has been around for quite some time, and here's a picture taken in 1933 that basically showed people getting their cars filled up with a 10% alcohol blend, something that we are doing today that we thought maybe was a new concept in the early 2000s, but it wasn't. This, by the way, was taken Lincoln, Nebraska is where this was at. So I told you in this video we're going to start off with the 1920s, and we're going to go back and we're going to take a look at what was going on during this time. So here's 1920. 1920, we had this concept that engines could use ethanol as a fuel source. Engines, if made the proper way, could easily take ethanol, burn it, and do a job, do work. And sometimes that work is to move a vehicle. So this was not an old concept. This was something that was accepted back in the day. But I told you that there's got to be some reason that when the ethanol tax was removed, that we didn't just divert back to ethanol. And one of those reasons happened in 1920s. 1920s, we had a little bit of something called World War I. And during this time, ethanol usage surged. Ethanol was a product that was used for many different things, not just to put into a vehicle as a fuel source, but to also use in the chemical industry. We made everything with ethanol. It was a very important ingredient for many different things, and they're all listed here. Rubber was one of them. Tires were one of them. Raincoats, engine gaskets. All of these very important things that were needed for wartime. During this time, we also get prohibition, and we get the denaturing process. Denature basically means to contaminate. We want to contaminate the ethanol so you do not drink it. We order denatured alcohol in our lab. That way, when we order the alcohol, it is denatured and we can't just pass it around to students and let them get drunk off of it. So ethanol during this time was such an important commodity that we needed that we just couldn't put it into a gas tank and burn it. We really had to reserve the ethanol for its proper use, something that was a little bit more important than your vehicle back in the day. And that was during a war. So it was removed for common use. No more. During the 1920s, they said, okay, ethanol is out of the picture. Again. Right? Again. Ethanol's gone. Can't use it. Sorry. Can't put it in your gas tank. We need it for something else. But your old friend gasoline was still there. Your old friend gasoline was just waiting in the shadows, waiting for you to come back. And gasoline had some issues. It had some things it needed to work out a little bit. So we looked at gasoline and we said, you know what? Our relationship might not have been perfect in the past, but I think that if we work on this relationship, we can improve it. And what they did in 1923 was include lead-based gas. They put lead in it. And the reason is because when we put gasoline into a vehicle, sometimes that vehicle would do what we call knock. Sometimes it would be so loud, sometimes it would be so violent that it would literally shake you while you were in it. No one wants to ride in a vehicle that is doing that as you're driving it. But we discovered that if we put lead in the gasoline, it kind of prevents some of this from happening. We improve almost like the octane rating. I mean, that's what all this boils down to. That's why certain vehicles require a higher octane rating. They're a little bit more sensitive to the nastier gasoline blends that might be out there. Well, during this time, Harvard comes around and says, no, you can't do that. You can't do it because if you put lead in gasoline, you can lead to poisoning, and we can't have that. Well, we ignored them. We still put lead in gasoline. Blow off, Harvard. We don't want to listen to you. And in 1923, gas prices began to rise due to a number of things again. And the concept of a 10% blend with ethanol began. Well, we're going to skip another decade into the 1930s. 1930s, prohibition stops. Look how happy they are. I mean, look at this guy's face. I mean, do you think he would rather be anywhere else at this time other than that bar drinking with that beer bottle in his hand? I don't think he is. But in 1930s, prohibition ends. What was ethanol, very common, used for multiple purposes, was taken away from us the first time. Then it was reintroduced. That taken away the first time was really a huge tax that was placed on it. And then we go through an era where alcohol was taken away again for war. And now it's given back to us again. And what happens? Ethanol production skyrockets again. Skyrockets again. One of those reasons is people begin to drink it more. Another one of those reasons, it had to meet the demand of World War II. So during this time, gasoline was getting pumped into vehicles. People were getting accustomed to pumping gas into vehicles. Ethanol was out there. Ethanol just kind of came and went. Kind of like that high school crush back in the day. You just see them 1 or 2 days and that's it. A spark ignites one more time and then, 2-3 days later it's over. You wait until you see them again years later down the road. That's ethanol here. Well, during this ethanol pull, one more time, over and over, same old story, the American Petroleum Institute campaigned. And they said, listen, ethanol harms the petroleum industry, and it harms the auto industry. It reduces oil consumption. You don't want to reduce oil consumption, do you? No. So just continue to use gasoline. We're here for you. We've never went away. You can count on us. We really are using our product for your vehicles, and we will never come and go like ethanol does. So you need to become more dependent. That was their argument, folks, and they fell for it. Okay. I mean, this guy, okay. I can see him say that, okay. So after the war was over, of course, production went down with the ethanol again. We didn't need that much of it anymore. So farmers began to export their product. That exporting their product, that product was used to make alcohol. Well, they weren't really in this business anymore. At the same time, what began to happen is that farmers began to lose money. They really relied on this crop. They relied on the crop to be grown and sold to make ethanol with, so they were raking in tons of money during this time. But then after the demand for ethanol was over, once again, the farmers were found in a predicament once again, because now they were growing all of this stuff and it wasn't really needed anymore. So they started exporting it out. Well, the sales were so low that many of the farmers left. They just got up, they left their farms, and they went to the cities and they found other work. They found other jobs that would make them a paycheck so they could pay their bills. In addition to all of this, we also get into this concept of foreign oil. Foreign oil was dirt cheap. It was very available. And it continued to make gasoline cheaper than ethanol. So even though ethanol was available during this time to be used as a fuel, the problem now was that other countries got into the mix, and these other countries lowered the price of gasoline so much that it was cheaper than ethanol. So which one are you going to buy? You're going to buy the cheap the cheap gasoline to put in your vehicle, or are you going to buy the more expensive ethanol to put into your vehicle? And this continued the trend and the reliance on gasoline for our cars. During the 1930s, we also get this product called agrol. All right, well, agrol was defined as a ethanol fuel plant. They claim the oil industry sabotaged this plant. And they sabotaged it so much, they basically shut it down. They harassed the plant. They harassed the employees. They basically went in, messed a bunch of stuff up, shut it down. All of a sudden, production stops. They claim the oil industry did it. Do they have any proof? No. But that's what they said. But look at what agrol was. An ethanol fuel plant. Huh. What was the title of this lecture? Oh, yeah, that's right. The title of this lecture was called Biofuel. Biofuel is a concept that many people associate with the years 2000 and on. But guess what? Shouldn't surprise you now. Biofuel concept kind of started in 1930. And that concept started with this. Didn't quite make it. Somebody else had it in for this industry. We're going to put a stop to all alcohol-based fuels. We're going to make sure that gasoline stays in these people's tanks. And one of the ways that we can do that is we make it cheap. If we make it cheap, this is going to be the reliance that people need to put into their cars to get them to where they're going. We have to make sure that this product stays so low that nothing else can beat it out. And this is the way we're going to make money. Well, this was 1930s. Now I'm going to fast forward even more. All right? I'm going to fast forward now to the 1970s. 1970s was a different time, a different decade. During the 1970s, a couple of things went on here. One, the United States placed embargoes on gas from foreign sources. You know, up until this point, what was going on is that we were basically shelling out tons of money to these other foreign countries, countries that not necessarily likes the United States and many other countries for that matter, and they basically were socking it to us. Little bit by little bit by little bit. We would buy their oil, they would set the price. A couple of different things go into setting price of gasoline, but they would set the price. We would buy it, we would ship it in, you would put it in your car, and you would drive with it. You would pay for it, not question about it. You know, I think for some reason, people believe that gasoline comes from the tank that sits down below the gas pump. They don't really know that it comes from foreign countries, but it does. Well, during this time, we had this thing called the Arab oil embargo. This created a worldwide energy crisis. Does that sound familiar? It seems like we get these same stories over and over and over and over and over. What was happening during this time is that a lot of these countries, well, their religion doesn't quite match up with the religions of maybe Western civilization. They look at us as basically the evil empire. So they don't really like what we do. They don't really like what we stand for. They do not like the religion that our country is based off of. So they wanted to sock it to us. And more than that, they said, we're not selling it to you. Sorry. Well, when this begins to happen, it just didn't affect the United States. It affected other countries as well. And during this time, gasoline skyrocketed. All of a sudden, we were hit with this concept that, what are we going to do? If we can't get gasoline, what are we going to do? Because we have a problem. We need it. Remember this picture? This picture showed up. Lecture video or two back. Gas shortage. Sales are limited. Folks, this really happened. Come on now. You are strictly tied, or we were strictly tied, to foreign oil. And what they say goes. It's their product. They sell it to us. We're the buyer. We ship it in. We put it in our cars. Even though we have oil reserves here, even though we can produce our own gasoline, even though we can become self-reliant in a way, we're going to fork out all this money to other countries that dictate what they want to sell and how they want to sell it. All right, well, the 1970s was the first problem with this. Brazil said, you know what? Whatever. We don't need gasoline. We're going to go and we're going to create our cars and we're going to get off of gasoline and we're going to ensure that they are running off of ethanol. Poor ethanol, forgotten about years and years ago. Prior to the year 1900, ethanol was used in its first engine. And now Brazil, of all places, Brazil comes around and says, no, we're going to use ethanol to power what we need to power. And we're going to slowly get off of this gasoline need. We don't need it anymore. And finally in 1970, ethanol looks pretty again. Ethanol that was taken away and brought back, and taken away and brought back. Taken away, forgotten about. Now comes rolling in one more time. And it looks more attractive than ever. 1979, Jimmy Carter created incentives for ethanol production. Remember all those farmers, all of those farmers that left their fields to go into the cities to get jobs because they were producing ethanol left and right back into the 1930s. Finally, it comes around one more time, and this industry booms once more. These incentives basically incentivizes, I mean, that's the purpose in it, right? For people to go out, grow the crop, and produce ethanol once more. Not only that, but during this time, they argue that a 10% ethanol blend reduces the amount of carbon monoxide and other toxins that are in gas. I mean, think about it. You're burning ethanol. 10% of it is ethanol. So therefore, 10% less is gasoline. Therefore, 10% less is carbon monoxide and other toxins that you would have been burning if it wasn't for the ethanol blend. And not only that, but you remember that lead that we added back years ago? Well, you know, if we add ethanol in, ethanol is an octane booster. We knew this all along, but if we add ethanol back into this gas, we can get rid of the lead. And this should make you happy too. So the argument of ethanol blend begins to happen once more. Again, Brazil said blend. We don't need a blend. We'll just use ethanol. Us, I will settle for 10%. Notice over here in this cartoon, Mean Bully overlooking Kissinger, leaned over an oil barrel, and it says oil embargo on the side. Don't force us to do something about this, even though they know that we desperately need it. And what are we going to do? Walk away during that time? No. During that time, we could point our finger like he's doing here and say, this is what we're going to do, and do very little about it. The next decade leads us into the 1980s. All of these tax incentives that go out to these farmers, that go out to these producers of ethanol, it makes this field very attractive now. Over 100 new corn alcohol production plants are built. Now 1 billion gallons of ethanol were produced, and they were dominated by a company called ADM. ADM stands for Archer Daniels Midland. Well, not all ADM site locations dabble into this, but ADM was a major powerhouse back in the 1980s with corn and the products from that industry. 1988, President Bush during the time focused on replacing benzene, which was found in gasoline. And if you take our instrumentation course, you'll see that we'll detect benzene in gasoline with ethanol. Again, another need for ethanol to be blended in fuel. Not only did it increase the octane rating, but it could actually be substituted for benzene to increase that octane rating. And this eventually leads into what we call the 1990 Clean Air Act. It was kind of the precursor. It set this up. So ADM, powerhouse in the ethanol market, perfectly locating itself into the Midland of the United States, now controls ethanol production, the biggest workhorse of them all. Now, we have ADM, a version of ADM's down in Southport, near Southport at least. Do they do this kind of stuff? No, not necessarily. But it is a sister site of the ADM company. So now we skip another 10 years, and another 10 years, we're now into the 1990s, and we have, for the first time, what we see an oil surplus. If you grew up in the 1990s, this was an era without cell phones, right? You get in your car and you cruise around town. We had no phones to call each other, to text each other, right? We had no internet, really, for some of us. What we did for fun is that on Friday and Saturday nights, we got into our vehicles, we filled it full of gasoline, and we drove around town for hours. That's right, for hours. We made one loop after another loop after another loop. We cranked down our windows. We cranked up the radio. We looked at who else was cruising around town. We threw up our hands and we thought we were cool. That's what was going on in the 90s. Well, one of the reasons that this was okay and we didn't think about it is that we had an oil surplus. This drove the price of gasoline down. It plummeted, folks. We were buying gallons of gas for 99 cents or cheaper per gallon. Well, what happened during this time? Gas price goes down. No need for ethanol anymore. And ethanol plants go out of business. Do you see the cycle? It's a roller coaster effect. Benzene still removed. Benzene still taken out when it can be. We still need an octane booster. Well, ethanol is now replaced with a compound called MTBE. MTBE stands for methyl, tert, butyl, ether. All right, so here's the ether structure. It's an ROR, ROR. Okay. Here is methyl. And then this butyl means 4. Count the carbons up. 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's called tert because it's on a tertiary carbon. Tertiary means 3. So this carbon is attached to 1, 2, and 3 of them. So this is what we call a tert-butyl group. Methyl tert-butyl ether. All right, well, the issue here, pollution problems begin to come around. Pollution, no good. We want to get rid of it when we can. So what do? We bring our good old friend ethanol back in again, and production increases one more time. Poor old used and abused ethanol. Just comes and goes. Comes and goes. That's all he does. Folks, what I'm trying to get across here is that gasoline is tied to multiple industries. But gasoline, by convenience, was chosen to put into our vehicles because everything else was so expensive, right? We have something here, ethanol. Ethanol would do a great job. But over the years, again and again and again and again, ethanol was tampered with. It was either tampered with because it was removed from our usage by your government, or it was tampered with in the price that the oil industry would skyrocket their prices down, just plummet them, not skyrocket, but plummet their prices down, which made it a much cheaper alternative than the ethanol source that we would have here today. So all of this is a very convoluted, mixed up story about why gasoline has been chosen and why gasoline has just become commonplace in today's vehicle. Once more, we knew that ethanol was a fuel source. We knew that it could run an engine. Back before 1900s, we knew that this was a possibility. Henry Ford created the car. He knew that ethanol was a gasoline alternative. But one of the reasons that it never made it is because something else always beat it out. Ethanol wanted to do good, but something was always yanking ethanol away from us. Time and time and time again. And because it was never there, something else had to fill the void. And that void was filled with crude oil, or a part of crude oil that we called gasoline. So in the next video, we'll pick up from the 1990s. And we'll continue on, because we're not in 1990. Sometimes I wish I was back in 1990 again. Again, I'm showing my age, but we're not. So we'll keep trucking on, and we'll talk about new decades and what it brought us and how times have changed. So come back. Let me tell you a little bit more about the history, folks.